The Buddhist does not believe in God, the soul, resurrection, judgment day, original sin, revelation, the world's having been created, nor of it having a beginning. It would seem that all these facts preclude not just the utility of drawing a comparison between Jesus and the Buddha, but its very possibility. We shouldn't give up quite so easily, though, and in what follows I will try and make a concise but strong parallel between the two figures, to address some of the concerns above and see what role each individual plays in the cosmic drama. On dual natures. One of the central claims of Christianity, discarding the debates around the issue, is that Jesus is both God and man. Possessing the nature of both, he occupies an intermediate position between man and God, the Father, linking them in his own self. This provides vital for all sorts of theological reasons, the most important being the nature of salvation. Buddhism, in one of its many modes, broadly a Mahayanist mode, similarly posits an absolute transcendent nature to the person we know as the Buddha. In other words, Siddhartha Gautama, the pre-enlightenment terrestrial name for the subject in question, is both man and possessed of what is later termed by the tradition Buddha nature. Buddha nature, it turns out, is co-equal with the Absolute. Buddhism will, though, in distinction to at least latent Christianity, though there are many hints of this in the Christian revelation and tradition itself, equally emphasize the Buddha nature of all beings and in fact of all reality. This plays a vital role in the possibility for anyone to attain to what the Buddha attained to, namely the Absolute and freedom from all suffering. The Buddha is still considered unique in that his enlightenment and example display this divine principle in a perfectly transparent manner, while in the case of everyone else this capacity is hidden and untapped. The resurrection and death. The death and subsequent resurrection of Jesus plays a number of roles in the cosmic and historical economy of Christianity. A primary one is the overcoming of death by the Spirit. Jesus shows in his example that no limited worldly condition or force can overpower his divinity and absoluteness. His resurrection is not only a display of his divinity, but the promise to all who follow him and trust in him that they too can transcend death. It is a model or archetype for the possibility of transcendence that requires faith in both the event itself, its historicity, but also in the radical metaphysical claim that Jesus is God. In Buddhist cosmology, samsara, which literally means to wander, is the realm of unending birth and death. Its conditionality, universality, universal feature of endless change means that nothing can remain stable within it in either its essence or the relations it takes on. No thing is eternal except the eternality of samsara itself. Therefore, no finite action, and what other kinds of action are there, could produce an infinite effect that will lead to the eternal repose of nirvana. And so there is no effort that could cross the chasm between the two realms. Contrary to what many think, in Buddhism no amount of good deeds or accumulation of good karma can afford to buy a ticket for the final show. And yet the Buddha's enlightenment is a victory over the cosmos itself. In the text, it's often described and portrayed in martial terms. Like Jesus, he has as his eternal nature the Absolute, or the Buddha nature, that cannot be overcome and removes all shackles and impediments. Another term used for nirvana is the attainment of the deathless realm, Amravati. So like in the case of Jesus, his enlightenment proves the conquering of death. The problem to be overcome and grace. Now, Jesus is not just a model for the possibility of victory over death, but is the cause of such a thing in everyone else too. In fact, the only cause. No terrestrial power is capable of saving itself, much less others from the fact of death conferred upon it by reason of its interminable sin. As finite beings, we have no way of going beyond ourselves, through ourselves, but are reliant on the grace and condescension of God himself. Like a life raft saves beings flailing in the current, so does Jesus save beings when called upon with faith in his saving power. For such a process or event to take place, the baggage that we carry has to be discarded. With it we are weighed down and forever condemned. But this sin that burdens everyone is taken on by the life raft. We inherited such a burden by our very nature as humans, culpable, in a manner of speaking, for the very fall of man from his paradisical state beyond memory. Similarly, as in the doctrine of original sin, our wandering in samsara has been inherited from our past, though we are unaware. We remain within samsara because we impute to ourselves a metaphysical self that acts in the world and is the receiver of the results of such action. This self, in virtue of its orientation towards the finite and away from the infinite, cannot help but cling on to the ever-changing world. Like holding on to fresh flowers that hold us even firmer in return, when they begin to wither and die, we do so along with them. This in Buddhism is what sin is. What in Buddhism would be called the doctrine of no self, incorrectly said to be the idea of no soul in the religion, the Christian counterpart would be the doctrine of the powerless self. The idea of no self is the same answer to the same problem. The self is powerless and is in need of another, namely the Absolute that is Jesus, or of Buddha nature, and only when it abandons its pretense otherwise can it attain the deathless and be in union with this absolute reality. The Buddha is no mere example to aspire to, but is the source of perfection as well. For if he is co-equal with the Absolute in a transparent manner, and by necessity the Absolute is one, otherwise it wouldn't be such. If it was not one, it wouldn't be above causality and change and relation and so on. Then he is the self-same Buddha nature that undergirds our own being and in the end the whole universe. His enlightenment then is as if a cosmic unveiling of our own nature and of the grace that is offered to us within us, without meriting it or causing it through some set of deeds and so on. Enlightenment in Buddhism is not earned by anyone, since this one who we deem to be ourselves is a pretension and is the highest form of ignorance. The Absolute is beyond being purchased for mere shadows. Difference and relation. Perhaps we can make a distinction here, but ultimately I believe it is one of accent. That in Buddhism, the Buddha nature is simultaneously present to all things from all time, while in Christianity there is a more historical element to things, with the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus at some moment in time that opens the gate of universal grace there for all to receive it should they will. I think, however, for a God to be providential in a maximal sense and all-loving, then this historic moment in history cannot be divorced from an eternal will and goodness that transcends time and is coextensive with it. After all, Jesus does not just save those who come after him or those who are with him, but must do so across time and space, though the modality may differ. If I am right, it does not differ in the example of the Buddha, though I don't want to privilege one doctrine over the other and state something to the effect that Jesus' divinity is primary and the Buddha nature is merely a manifestation of the primary divinity of Jesus, or vice versa. In any case, we must speak of the perfect love and wisdom of the Buddha and of Jesus, in that, in their absolute nature, they give freely their own nature to all and offer it to all who come. Their nature is not just a fact that is out there, but implies, since it extends, latently at least, to each of us, or even in us, that it is relational. And so liberation cannot be a self-centered act, but is one of embracing the self of all through the absolute self that all things share an affinity with. Such a thing is only possible if there is an orientation on the part of beings here towards their principle and towards the saving power of the Buddha nature, or Jesus, and the historical form this took in either the crucifixion/resurrection or the historical enlightenment.